The 7th generation of gaming. Video games have been huge throughout every generation, and the 7th one was easily no exception. With Sony establishing itself as the king of the 6th generation with the massively popular PS2, and Microsoft entering the console war with the Xbox, Nintendo and Microsoft were ready for war when 2006 rolled around, and the consoles they put out were something else. Ironically, Sony lagged behind at the start with their overpriced PS3, and it took them a while to get up to speed with the competition, while Nintendo's Wii pretty much became a dust collector for most people, aside from games like Smash Bros. And The Legend of Zelda to save the day. The Xbox, however, was always pretty consistently great. Well, I mean, it had its fuck-ups, but you get my point. I, like many others, have quite a collection of fond memories with the good old box, and while I don't know if I'd call it dead, considering people still play it and it still has Xbox Live and all that, it's undeniably old and its time is coming to an end. And with that, I thought it'd be fun to look back and see what made this console really special. So let's get right into it, my top 10 games for the Xbox 360. Oh, and before I actually start, I just wanted to mention, most people would be like, no two games from the same franchise shall ever cross paths on this list. But fuck that, this is my first video, I'm gonna do whatever. It's also worth mentioning that these aren't all exclusives. In fact, most of them aren't, just games that were on the system. Alright, let's begin. Starting off this list is a title I'm sure anyone would recognize, whether they had played it or not, and with Andromeda around the corner, it's definitely worth looking back on the 2007 classic that started it all. But don't get me wrong, I did not smack this baby up on here to keep up with the times or anything. This is on here because it's a damn good game. And to be honest, I'm not sure what I could say about Mass Effect that hasn't already been said. Well, actually, I forgot I said that, as I can apply that to nearly any game on this list. Anyway, here goes. Mass Effect sticks out for how it just throws you headfirst into a deep adventure where you're making important choices before the game even starts. And I'm not talking about your weapon class or how ugly your character is, but those are here too. Along this adventure, you'll recruit an awesome cast of memorable characters from every corner of the galaxy, each with their own colorful personalities and combat abilities. Granted, some characters are simply really good, Rex, and some just kinda suck. Sorry, Caden. And better yet, getting to know your crew well will enrich your experience not only with this game, but with the other two titles as you see these characters grow, reminisce, and deal with resurging old conflicts. And that brings me to another thing that's awesome about the Mass Effect games. Upon completing Mass Effect 1, you can transfer your save to Mass Effect 2, and upon completing that game, you can transfer content to Mass Effect 3. But that's more so a feature of the series as a whole, so I won't get into that too much. But just know that the big decisions you make in this game, like who lives and who dies, as well as the small things, like who you pissed off, will carry over even into the third title. So be careful. I should probably also talk about the gameplay. That's kind of important. If you ask me, the combat doesn't stand out nearly as much as the characters in the story, in case I didn't make that obvious enough, but it's pretty damn fun. You have a variety of different weapons to choose from, but odds are, unless you picked Soldier like me, most of them will probably be just as useful as throwing bottles of your own piss at the enemies. Actually, that would be more useful, as you're just fighting robots all the goddamn time anyway. And at least with that, you'd get a good laugh out of it instead of looking like a fucking dumbass. But that actually brings me into one of the game's flaws. You'll be fighting a lot of the same enemies. Thankfully, there are some interesting powers you and your crew can get. Empowering them up and swapping out partners does keep things fresh, but don't worry, if anything else, the story should keep you going. Personally, I love the combat, even for how odd or outdated it may feel at times, and I think it's the best in the series. But I have to admit that the other titles did a lot of things better, like the removal of the disgustingly unresponsive and buggy Mako, buggy, and the addition of quick time events and dialogue and longer main quests. However, none of that stops this game from being as amazing as it is and earning its spot on my list.
My people have a say. Seek the enemy of your enemy, and you will find a friend.
Glad to have you on the team, Rex.
Alright, now here's a title I can easily explain my love for. And for me, my love for this game is pretty personal, so I apologize in advance for not talking about the actual game itself very much. So sit down, kids, because it's story time. Now, my whole life, I've been playing pretty much one fighting game, and that was Smash Bros. I'd always wanted to get into other fighting games, but I never really got many opportunities to do so, as none of my friends really cared about the genre. But everything changed when the Xbox Games with Gold service attacked, and our hard drives were greeted with 6.6 gigs of Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition to play for free. I played it with my friends a bit, but they quickly grew bored of it. But I didn't. I wanted someone who I could play with all the time, someone to have as a rival, because trust me, unless you have a lot of practice or you're a prodigy, you'll get fucking eviscerated online. Anyway, thankfully I found that person a couple years ago, and he had the same interests as me. So almost every day he'd come home with me after school so we could duke it out, and sometimes we'd continue the fight online when he got home. Admittedly, I started raging pretty hard during our matches somewhere down the road, and we had eventually grown tired of the fighting we'd start having in real life. But after Street Fighter, I started getting into other fighting games just as I had always wanted, like Mortal Kombat, Killer Instinct, and other Street Fighters. And every once in a while, the two of us would still hop online to play just one more round. Alright, now with a top 10 like this, there's usually that one entry pretty much everyone is expecting. And here it is, Bungie's legendary classic from 2007, Halo 3. This was actually my first Xbox game ever, and it was something else to me. I had grown up with Nintendo, so when I came home from school to see my brother playing this on the new 360 in our living room, all I could do was watch in awe and ask if I could play too. So I grabbed the controller and the rest was history. Despite the fact that this game wasn't quite my generation, as it came out when I was only 8, that didn't stop me and my friends from having our fair share of memories with it. Gunning down your friends in hectic free-for-alls and dropping a fresh teabag on them, or one-on-one duels on Guardian, is something you just can't forget. Memories like this make me think of how much of a shame it is that fewer and fewer games these days have local multiplayer, but that's a whole other can of worms. But if you couldn't play local, you had online, which was a lot of fun as well. I mean, aside from all the shit talkers. This game is actually what made me get Xbox Live, and that decision has had a big impact on my gaming and social life that still affects me to this day. Remember how I said in the beginning that I wouldn't oppose putting two games from the same franchise on this list? Well, here's our first example of that. While I'm pretty sure I made it obvious how much I liked the character development and story in the first game, Mass Effect 2 took that and made it better. Mass Effect 2 introduces 9 new squad mates, in addition to 2 more with the DLCs, and you can still see all your pals from the last game despite the fact you can only use 2 of them. So this begs the question, with all these new team members, how are you supposed to get to know them all? Well, through character-specific loyalty missions, of course. You'll find that all of your teammates are struggling with some type of personal issue, and you lending a hand starts their loyalty mission. These missions were always the most memorable, and it really taught you a lot more about your team than the good old support conversations ever could. Doing these missions also had practically necessary gameplay bonuses as well, and speaking of the good old G word, they did some cool things with that. Every planet has some value aside from being just a wall of text you could read about, as you can mine for resources needed to upgrade your ship and stuff. You could also find surprise missions on random planets, which was a nice touch. The only gameplay revamp I disliked was the combat, but a lot of people seem to like the various combat changes, like the reloadable mags from batteries, and the less wonky feel. Either way, it's still great, and this game is more than double the length of first, so you'll be in for one hell of a ride. Man, let me tell you what, BioShock was one incredible game. It takes a lot for any game to balance storytelling, atmosphere, and gameplay all so well, but that game blended them together beautifully. Unfortunately, it did have its fair share of obvious flaws, those being that the game was too damn short, too damn easy, and the story was a little too damn slow, with only one giant plot point, which I will not spoil. Thankfully, BioShock 2 fixes all of these things, maybe not perfectly, but it's definitely an improvement in all areas mentioned, and it is the game that takes the number 6 spot on this list. It is a tad bit longer, and with the multiplayer mode and DLCs, there's a lot more to do. Combat is smoother and refreshingly more difficult, and the story just has more happening in it. And I mean, come on, you get to play as a big daddy. one of the main enemies from the first game, and that's just all kinds of badass. I would talk about this game more, but I do plan on doing a video covering the series as a whole, so if you're interested in the series in any way, I encourage you to check that out when I upload it. So on my last entry, I talked about a relatively short game. Well, now I'm going to talk about a relatively huge one. And now I know people in the comments will be like, "Oh, faggot like Skyrim on console, KYS yourself." And, well, fuck off. Although this game is admittedly more of a PC game, I didn't even have a good computer until relatively recently, so the Xbox version did me just fine. And it does work fine despite what it does lack. Anyway, I think the first thing that really amazed me with Skyrim was the graphics. In 2011, these graphics were, in my opinion, utterly fucking amazing. Flames look epic, environments are breathtaking, and dragons look even more fucking epic than, like, anything. The leveling system was pretty cool, and encouraged you to try everything the game had to offer. There really aren't any borderline useless classes like in the other games, and shouting at people was a hell of a lot of fun. Although everyone just kinda stuck with Unrelenting Force. Smithing was also a really fun addition. Even though most of my memories with it involving me making a million fucking iron daggers, it was still cool. While there are a number of things that I don't enjoy as much, such as dragons being fucking annoying, the game being buggy as all hell, and most of the side quests being a little less interesting than the ones from the previous game, Skyrim still has a hell of a lot to offer anyone looking to sink a lot of hours into a good RPG. And with the DLCs left unfinished by me, I see myself going back to Skyrim sometime soon. Now here's a title that holds some weight with it being on the 360, and I have a short story to go along with this one. Several years back, I saw my favorite YouTuber talking about some game called Demon's Souls. I was pretty blown away from what I saw. It looked epic, it sounded epic, and the promise of difficulty allured me. However, once I realized that this was a PS3 only game, I gave up hope of ever playing it and said, well, fuck it. Dark Souls was almost out and somehow I hadn't heard of it. And when I did, it took me a couple of years to find out the two were in the same series. And then, I was interested. And as soon as I began playing, I was entranced. Then I showed this baby to my pal Jake, and we played the shit out of it. And he went on to buy a PS3 for Demon's Souls, and we played the shit out of that. And we drank Mountain Dew, and it was a grand good time. And if FromSoft had never released this series outside of Sony's grasp, a lot of people would have never gotten to try this awesome series, and this title especially. While it may be buggy, laggy, and just pretty messy overall with some completely rushed areas, along with parts that'll make you want to go full Eric Harris on your classmates, it has a lot of amazing, epic moments to offer. The monsters are badass, but the bosses are badass, and the music that accompanies each fight, The vast varieties of weapons, spells, armors, and enchanted rings make room for all sorts of different builds you can try. The game never holds your hand, and the world feels very connected, as you'll find various shortcuts that blend together beautifully. Now, the main thing this game is really known for, however, is its difficulty. And if that's pushing you away from this game, let me clarify on that. The game is really only hard the first time around. Once you learn how everything works, and you get a feel for how all your foes behave, the game is really quite easy. And if you really don't want to take the time to learn the game, just use the wiki or do whatever, just experience this game. Trust me, it's worth it. But as far as the second one goes, fuck that shit. Unless it's the Scholar of the First Sin edition. He's okay. Anyway, I've rambled long enough. On to the next game. So in my section on Halo 3, I mentioned how a big thing holding the game back for me was that it just wasn't in my time, right? Well, this game was. But don't begin to think I shoved this game up here for just that reason. That's just one of the things that really allowed me to appreciate this game. This game was also in my time, but I think it's the worst in the franchise. Anyway, Halo Reach is just a damn solid game. It immediately jumps ahead of the last game's multiplayer in the aspect of game modes, as you can play the crap ton of various modes without having to get the DLCs for a majority of them. And along with that, there were some pretty new kick-ass modes they introduced, like Team Doubles, Everything in Action Sack, and MLG. Yay. Something I really liked was the addition of armor mods. It gave everyone their own kind of way to play, and fighting a team with a different composition of abilities was always interesting. But unfortunately, one of these abilities was completely overpowered, and one of them just fucking sucked! But anyway, I still like them. Another pretty undeniable improvement was the armor and leveling system. Using your XP as a sort of currency to buy your armor pieces really let you personalize your Spartan, and you really got every piece to change. I also found the campaign to be pretty amazing. For once, or twice, you weren't playing as Master Chief, as this game's story precedes the other games, and that's pretty cool. But because your Spartan is not named John, you know it's not going to be a happy ending, and it isn't. And I like that a lot. I can go on to gush over the new and improved Forge and all the memories I have with crazy custom games, but I don't want this to go on for too long. Just know that this game is fucking dank, and my life wouldn't be the same without it. Although we got into the life-changing territory with Dark Souls, so that should be expected at this point. Anyway, on to number 2. Alright, now I gotta be honest. 75% of the time a sequel hits a game I really like, I like the original more. With my Mass Effect 2, Bioshock 2, and Halo Reach entries, I haven't really exemplified that well. But trust me, that's how I am. But I think if I had to pick the one direct sequel to be the king of all sequels, it would have to be none other than Borderlands 2. I liked Borderlands 1, it was pretty good. And seeing the trailers for Borderlands 2, I wasn't all that interested in it, but my friends were getting it, so I ended up pre-ordering it to play with them. And holy shit, was it love at first sight. It was still the same old desolate Pandora, but just so much nicer. It looked nicer, it was more upbeat, it was funnier, and I feel like it just had a lot more life and personality than the first game. Everything about it was just more memorable, and the mostly silent characters you played as in the first game made for some surprisingly interesting NPCs in the second game. In addition to the atmosphere as a whole being nicer, the story pushing it all into motion was a hell of a lot more interesting. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it wasn't great, but it was there, and I remembered it, which is something I can't say about the first games. But more importantly, what about the gameplay? Well, combat is just a lot more fluid, and there's just kind of a lot more running around. And you don't gotta stop to pick crap up, and you can throw your guns at people, and you can move while trying to revive yourself by getting a kill, and it's just better. If I could sum up what makes this game just so much better than the previous, I'd do it by saying there's nothing I miss from the first game. It's still the same game the first one was at its core, just all the stuff I didn't like improved. And to me, that's the making of a great game. And I know that there are plenty of people that like the first game more, but for me, it just doesn't get much better than this on the 360. But there is still one game. Now, I'm pretty sure I made this obvious, but I have a pretty good amount of nostalgia for a lot of the titles on this list. But this game is something else. One of the earliest titles for the 360, it's the game that came before Skyrim and after Morrowind, and while I really liked those games, they just don't hold a candle to Oblivion. This was the second Xbox game, or really second game not on a Nintendo console, that I ever played, but there was a big difference with this game and Halo. With Halo, I'd already heard so much about it before I had played it, and while I was playing it. With Oblivion, I did not know what I was getting into. I bought it thinking it would be your typical RPG, but boy was I wrong. Right from the character customization, I was hooked. You could pick from one of 10 character races, each with their own skills. You can make so many details in their face different, pick from one of many special powers, and customize a class from a myriad of different skill sets. You really got to make your character your character. But what about when you got out into the world? Well, you were told you should go to such and such place to continue the main story, but you didn't have to. You got to make your adventure your adventure. You could pick from one of many shops to buy stuff, or just break into that shop later at night and rob it. Want to kill the owner in his sleep while you're at it? Just don't get caught, or you'll have to deal with the consequences. Do you really like murdering people? Well, then you can join the Dark Brotherhood, a faction dedicated to that very thing. Would you rather steal? Then join the Thieves Guild, or fuck it, just join both of them. How do you fight? Do you burn him with destruction magic, slice him with the blade, or snipe him with the bow? Any option is viable, and you can go anywhere in between. You could also join guilds that suit your combat style, like the Fighters or Mages Guild. Tired of all the crap spells everyone is selling you? Well, you can make your own. And trust me, you can do some ridiculous stuff with that. Like, increase your speed dramatically for a period of time and move so fast the game has trouble keeping up with you. That is a lot of fun. Or, instead of working for a guild, you can focus on helping the locals with their problems in a very typical, it's an RPG, so I can't do anything, so you do all the work sort of way. Don't want to mess with civilization? Well, you can explore the vast number of dungeons and ruins full of monsters and loot that dot the huge landscape. Oh yeah, weren't you supposed to do the main storyline? Well, that delivers hours of content and a pretty exciting tale, so don't you worry about that. Have you somehow done everything the game's 300 plus hours of content has to offer? Well, there's DLCs as well, so you can pump even more of your life into this game. If I haven't made the point clear enough, there is a lot to do in this game, and a lot of these quests you do will impact your world in a small yet noticeable way, making the world feel even more alive than it already does. I've gone on and on about all the stuff this game has to offer, and Bethesda's Fallout and other Elder Scrolls games offer similar amazing features, but they just don't do it nearly as well as Oblivion does, if you ask me. I mean, I could go into a long rant explaining why this game in particular is so great, but that would be for another video. Just know that Oblivion is an amazing game, and for me, it made the Xbox 360 a very special console to me. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed going on this trip through memory lane with me about all the games that have graced the 360 over the past 10 years or so, even though most of them could be found on other platforms. But it doesn't matter, they are on the system, you know? I want to thank you for watching. This was my first YouTube video I ever made, and I have a lot of stuff planned for this channel. So if you want to see what I got coming out, then make sure to subscribe to see what the future awaits. I'd really appreciate it. Alright, peace.